Hi, this is Anna Kitney, and I've got Alexandra Brown with me today. We're going to be talking about the ego. How are you, Alexandra?
I'm very well, thanks, Anna. How are you?
I'm very, very good. This topic of the ego is absolutely fascinating. You've obviously written a blog, and I've done quite a bit of research on the ego. And so we've got some questions to ask you so that people can actually get an idea of what the ego is,
Okay.
how it serves them, and how to overcome the ego so they can really get to their true self. So, what is the ego?
The ego is your greatest challenger. It's like having an inner competitor inside you. So, for example, if you were a great actor, if you imagine a great actor or actress, okay, so let's just think of someone like Al Pacino. I always think he's great. He's kept himself very quiet, rarely does interviews, but he's a brilliant actor. Now, if you imagine him on stage giving a speech, it could be really quite fascinating. If you went to the theatre and Al Pacino was there and he started giving a speech or a soliloquy, but up to a certain point, let's say he goes on for 20, 30 minutes, you're going to find your attention sort of wandering away despite his genius, right? But if you bring in another actor or actress as good as him, you're going to see how they shine off each other. So, for example, let's bring Jodie Foster in. Okay, she's won a few Oscars. She's very skilled and talented. And she starts to bring some life into this speech that he's giving by interjecting. And all of a sudden, you've got a truly alive play and you're kind of gripped. So each actor inspires the other as they work together. Mm-hmm. So let's just say for analogy's sake, Jodie Foster is the essence and Al Pacino is the ego, right? Mm-hmm. Your ego, Al Pacino, is going to challenge Jodie Foster, right? Try and trip her up, show off his genius. And Jodie Foster is going to take him to a highest perspective and say, well, actually, things can be done like this. And so they have this very heated discussion. So that's my analogy of what an ego is, apart from the fact that I believe it's an implant. I believe it works within us just like our bones. We have a skeletal system in this life, and we also have an ego implant. It's like a computer program, but a very small little chip of a computer program. So its viewpoint is limited. It's the kind of thing that says to you, you can't do this. So let's say in this economic climate, you want to become a millionaire and yet you're struggling on less than 20,000 a year, right? Mm-hmm. Your ego is going to say to you, or someone's ego is going to say to them, that's impossible. How are you going to get from 20,000 to a million within this time space? Now your higher self or your spirit really, your true essence is going to say, well, I'm going to imagine it, I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to let the universe figure out how.
It's amazing. So would you say the ego is sort of influenced by money and power or lack of money and power? Like, for instance, the pop stars and overnight celebrities that, often said sort of the ego goes to their head. And, people who perhaps have lost their jobs or been made redundant, kind of their ego takes a blow.
Right, I see what you mean. You can have your identity. See, your identity is slightly different to your ego. Your ID, or the id as it's forming from childhood, is slightly different. So if in your example, pop star has had it all very easy, lots of major success, or seems to have had it easy, right? Because that's how we perceive it. And then all of a sudden, they're not popular anymore. They've got writer's block. They can't write any new songs, and they've gone off, right? And they're making much less money and less popular. Mm-hmm. So it's going to affect two parts of them. It's going to affect their identity, right? Mm-hmm. If you over-identify yourself with your work and you think that's all of who you are, you're going to get into trouble because work changes over time and over years. And the ego part of that pop star probably would say, oh no, it's all terrible, I can't do it. So there's a difference between the arrogance the arrogant side of an ego, that when things are going really well, that part of the program or that arrogance comes in of, hey, everything's really easy and I can get whatever I want. I'm not too convinced that's arrogant. I actually believe there's an aspect of that is spiritual awareness, because when things flow and they're easier, that's when you know you're doing something right. Mm-hmm. If you're struggling a lot, even when things are flowing, that's when I know my ego's coming, right? That's when I go, okay, this is the ego. This is my ego saying, oh, I don't believe it. Oh, don't get too into that. It could all change anytime. I believe that the ego is implanted within us in this kind of computer program inside our brains in order to keep us surviving. It's not there to help us thrive. Okay? So its whole mechanism is to stop you from doing something too drastic or drastically different in your life, in case you upset your survival. The ego is the part of you that knows how things were. They know how to survive. So your ego has a lot of different aspects to it. So, for example, I've worked with people who've, bless them, but I've worked with some women who've been beaten up in relationships, right? And they've stayed in a relationship, in an abusive relationship, and been physically hurt by the same guy. And then said to me, well, I have to stay, he'll change, I love him. That's the ego, right? Because the ego wants them to stay in the same thing, whether it serves them or not, because the ego knows it has survived.
So is the ego sort of a storehouse for sort of, negative beliefs, negative emotions? I mean, is there any positive effect to the ego?
The positive aspect to the ego is part of the identification, right? So your ego will stop, can also, in the reverse of that scenario, can stop bad things happening to you. For example, you could stop something happening. If you have enough self-esteem within your ego, enough self-worth, you're going to say, okay, this is my limit. So the ego sets down limits as well, boundaries. So that's the positive side of the ego.
And can we exist without the ego?
Yes, we can, and we have. Everybody listening to this, and you and myself included, have had moments of time where we have flourished without the ego there. Some people call it dropping the ego, getting over the ego, or not having the ego. But basically, it's the point where you connect with who you truly are, with who your essence is, and the essence of everyone else. When you're in love, when people are first in love, they often drop the ego. They don't have those games in the relationship. Oh, you did this to me, I did that. I'm only here to see what you can give me. That's ego. When they're really in love, the vibration changes, the thinking changes, and everybody starts to look beautiful. You've experienced that. I've experienced that. People can achieve that by being in love, by doing theta healing, connecting to the seventh plane, by meditating, or by just connecting to their hearts. Now, we've existed for moments. I think the longest time I was in that vibration or in that state of being was a few days, which was quite good in the scheme of things. a few days, 24/7 of utter connection with all that is and love. So yeah, we can exist without it. It doesn't actually mean it's not there. It just means that for some reason we've shut it up.
So would it be like, for instance, like ascended masters like Buddha, who was able to sort of switch it off completely and remember that he's actually connected this energy of oneness?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. Or like a classic biblical figure, someone like Moses, would have had to have dropped, if you will, overcome parts of his ego in order to do metaphysical magic, like parting the seas, connecting to the energy of Jesus, Buddha, Buddha was just a representative of love, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. So when you connect to this energy, you're ultimately letting go of the ego.
When you connect to this energy, the ego loses its grip on you, right? Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, we can survive without the ego because there's something in us that survives beyond the physical, mm-hmm. right? So it depends on your definition of survival. But people who've experienced past lives, or those kids that come into a life now and literally remember everything from their past life, and they've got valid evidence of these kids finding objects that they used to have in a distant land that they had in another life, knowing everything that that person had known. So there's our essence, which is immortal, which goes beyond the ego.